the whole 6010.
Fantasy Focus Football is presented by Geico. Insurance can be hard. That's why Geico makes it easy with 24/7 claim services and on-the-go policy info in the app. It's easy to Geico. It is Tuesday, November 28th. It's actually Giving Tuesday. More on that a little bit later on in the show. I am Field Yates, joined by Stephania Bell. And Stephania, before I ask you how you are doing today, I must let you know that I feel like a Texans fan right now.
Oh, I was going to say you must be a Bears fan.
Well, I figured we'll talk about that. I'm wearing a Bears sweatshirt. Our director, Brian, asked, like, what's up with the shirt? Did you lose a bet? And I said, no, I was in the closet this morning. I figured to the victor goes the spoils. The Bears, of course, win on Monday Night Football. We'll talk about that game in a moment. Then I figured, why not? That's my reasoning.
So who are you a fan of, really?
The Bears today.
No, but you started to say.
Oh, I'm a fan of the Texans today.
Oh, the Texans.
Right,
okay.
because after multiple years of quarterback purgatory, they have C.J. Stroud.
He's pretty good.
After a day of Mike Clay only sitting next to me, I get you instead.
Oh,
so you
I
are the
see.
C.J. Stroud of the Fantasy Focus.
I'm in good company.
Yeah, your modesty shining through right now because you could barely take that compliment right there.
Well, I feel like by default,
Wow.
Daniel's out, so I'm next man up, as I say. I'm like the DTR. I'm Jake Browning.
No, but you know what? You're a higher achiever than those guys. They can barely score touchdowns with those two players in their center now. Don't sell yourself short. You're like C.J. Stroud. That's my analogy. I'm going to stick with it. But great to have Stephania here. And, of course, we got lots to dive into today, Stephania, including what I thought was a well-described scoring output by Troy Aikman yesterday. At one point during the game, and they didn't score a whole lot of points after this, but they were either coming back or leading into a break. And Troy said, like, a high-scoring baseball game has broken out here between the Vikings and the Bears. The Bears win 12-10.
I was surprised it got to double digits, quite frankly.
Yeah, but 12-10 with on the strength of 4 Cairo Santos field goals last night. He could have had a fifth. He missed a 48-yarder early. That included a late field goal with like 12 seconds left in the game. The Bears improved to 4-8. The Vikings improved to 6-6. Both teams go into their bye. Let's start with the Bears, Stephania. And if I say the Bears last night, are there any performances that stand out to you that you thought were particularly notable?
Roschon Johnson for like a second.
Yeah.
There wasn't a ton. I was trying to look, quite honestly, and I look through this lens of injuries all the time. So I started wondering about Justin Fields' thumb.
Yep.
After he got hit and the couple of turnovers that he had. Everybody remembers he dislocated his thumb and the issue was grip strength. And when he had a couple fumbles, I was like, did he get hit? Was there something I missed where it bothered his thumb? Also, the Bears running back situation has been, mixed up since they've had all these running back injuries. And I thought Roschon Johnson hasn't gotten much run of late, but I thought he looked really good when he had the ball.
He sure did. Yeah, he had 10 carries for 35 yards last night, plus he had 5 catches for 40 yards. On the running backs, here's what I'm keeping an eye on for week 14, because they're on a bye this week. When the Bears come back in week 14, is Deontay Foreman active for the game? Because Roschon Johnson played well enough last night to show that he deserves opportunities. Meanwhile, Khalil Herbert is the lead back in terms of like who takes the field when the Bears take the field for their first offensive play of the night. If Deontay Foreman is active, then I really think there's like no Bears running back that has any value because there's all 3 of them are going to play. If Foreman's inactive, then like in a deeper league, you can certainly consider a Roschon Johnson dart throw, but Khalil Herbert will be the best bet that even he would be sort of like a flimsy flex play. For the Bears, it's kind of been whittled down to like one, no question, no two ways about it starter, and that's DJ Moore.
DJ Moore. He's
How
the
great
only
was he
one.
last night?
He's
11 catches last night for DJ Moore for 13 targets for a total of 114 yards.
Cole Kmet, if you're desperate at tight end.
Yeah.
Because obviously tight end, we talk about it all the time, the tight end wasteland experience.
Sure.
And Cole Kmet's certainly a target.
Yeah, 7 catches last night for 43 yards.
You're going to get some points from him being targeted, but the only lineup block for me would be DJ Moore.
So just when you think about DJ Moore and his performance this season, this is not tied to DJ Moore's own ability, but of course, when you go from Justin Fields to Tyson Bagent, and we'll talk about Fields in just a minute, that there's that SpongeBob meme, and it's like SpongeBob, like there's one picture of him when like he's jacked, and there's one picture of him when he's like normal size SpongeBob. That to me reminds me of DJ Moore, right? DJ Moore with Justin Fields, huge hulking SpongeBob. DJ Moore with Tyson Bagent, the more normal version
Yeah.
of SpongeBob. So just a reminder of just how special that guy is. I'm not trying to throw salt in the wounds of Panthers fans, but I was thinking about them last night on a day in
What a
which
day.
they fired their head
Yeah.
coach.
What a
and then
day.
eventually their quarterback's coach, plus their
Right.
assistant
Their
head
running
coach,
backs
Deuce Staley.
coach. Deuce Staley.
These are like three men that we spent all off season talking about
What they were going to do that was
they're
so
building
positive.
this all-star staff.
Mhm.
Yeah, and all of a sudden all three of them are gone on top of all the turmoil yesterday. And the CJ Stroud being the presumptive NFL Rookie of the Year and Bryce Young struggling.
Right.
Then DJ Moore goes off last night.
Right.
Again, it's
And
like
you're
the guy
reminded,
that was there.
Yet another
Yeah.
another player that they gave away for
Moore is tremendous. And Justin
loss,
Fields,
I should
Stephania.
say.
The good and the bad with Justin Fields is this. The good is that he's such a weapon with his legs.
So many times he probably avoided a handful of sacks.
Yeah.
I mean, how he could have had 5 or 6 sacks
Yeah.
or losses, and he managed to escape those.
Yep, he did. So he ends up with 12 carries for 59 yards and 12 rushing attempts for any quarterback not named Lamar Jackson or Justin Fields is a lot. Maybe Jalen Hurts as well. But for Justin, that's going to set a floor. The problem is what's the ceiling week in and week out. And while we've had these moments of brilliance, back-to-back 4 passing touchdown games, I think this is why, not only in fantasy, but in real life, the Justin Fields conversation is so fascinating. There are teams at the bottom of the order right now that there's no two ways about it. I keep coming back to the Patriots because the difference between the Patriots and as an example, Carolina is Carolina's committed to Bryce Young for at least next year. There's just no two ways about it, right? But the Patriots so obviously need to change at quarterback. There's just no hope for what they have under center right now. Right. And there are other teams that are in that category, but don't necessarily have as much draft capital as the Patriots could have. For the Bears, who I think now moved to pick 5 of their own and then pick 1 for Carolina, it's you could convince me that Justin Fields with Marvin Harrison and another elite playmaker around him to go with DJ Moore could be a really darn good quarterback.
Yeah.
You could also tell me that hey, when you're 3 or nearly 3 seasons in and you're not totally sold that he's the guy, maybe the better move is to move on to a rookie quarterback a la Caleb Williams.
I think it's really interesting. You probably have more insight in this department than I do. But look at all the changes from above that have happened for Justin Fields that he's had to adapt to.
Yeah.
Starting when he came into he comes into the NFL, you've got to adapt to an NFL offense. He's had different coaches. And just think back to what the conversation was a few weeks ago. Remember when it caused the great big stir of him talking about the coaching?
Yeah.
And I did not get upset with his comments because I felt like he was being very honest and kind of saying that he was overthinking. Trying to fit within a system and maybe overthinking his play.
Sure.
And I think that he's let loose of that of late. That's why we've seen him be better.
Yep.
But I think he deserves to carry through to another season because the flashes, like you say, are there. And I don't think this is all on him.
Yeah, I think, there's certainly going to be some naysayers. I mean, they did not have a vertical passing game last night. Other than the DJ Moore play at the end of the game, 36-yard game. So just do the math here. Take away that 36 yards from DJ Moore. Prior to that, Justin Fields had 181 yards on 36 attempts for 181 yards.
I'm no math
Stephania.
major, but I know that's not.
Yeah,
that's
6
not
yards
great.
per attempt is not. That's less actually. That's 5 yards per attempt. That's non-functional passing offense in the NFL. Maybe it was because they were afraid of the Vikings' defensive plan, whatever you will say. But I think the Justin Fields jury is obviously still out. For fantasy purposes, Stephania, it's just hard to assess whether he deserves to be a lineup lock. And I would argue that right now, because of the fact that a couple of guys that were kind of on the fringe have really settled in, and you've had the rise of players like Dak Prescott, who earlier in the season were not lineup locks, that Justin Fields is not a top 10 guarantee every single week. But that rushing upside certainly helps. Justin Fields and the Bears go into their bye. I forget who they play coming out of the bye. We'll talk about that more in Week 14. For the Vikings, Stephania, we may have a quarterback change. Josh Dobbs threw not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 interceptions last night.
It was like you knew. You just had a feeling, all the hype and the Pastronaut, and we loved what he did when he got to Minnesota. And we clearly, it's just such a smart processing quarterback in terms of being able to pick up new things. Last night was rough.
Yeah, it was.
I knew it was coming, but I didn't know it was going to look like that. And I'm an empath, so I'm sitting there just kind of cringing, just feeling so bad for him that this was the night he's having on Monday Night Football of all the times.
Yeah, so it's funny. Last night was one of those where it's like, all right, just Josh Dobbs is a 5th round pick. So when you go in the 5th round as a quarterback, the league is kind of saying, like, this guy's got a path to being like maybe a decent backup. Maybe, right? If you're going to be a starter, you go in the 1st round. If it's a flimsy chance of being a starter, 2nd round. 3rd round is like promising backup who could become a low-end starter. 5th round is like, we'll see, right?
Yeah.
And then he gets passed around like, the Loving Cup as a quarterback where he's got 5 teams in the past year. And you're like, wait, how does this keep happening? How is he on practice squads and getting traded for late-round draft picks? And there's a game last night, you're like, okay. Now, I would still argue that like what we've seen over the past, really basically the first 11 weeks of the season is more representative and like more impressive from Josh Dobbs than last night was disconcerting. But if you have been riding the Josh Dobbs train because your quarterback was Kirk Cousins and he got injured, or because you just passed on the quarterback spot entirely, you went with Geno Smith coming out of the gates this season, whatever the circumstances may be, he's been a top 8 quarterback, by the way. You need to make other plans because after the game, Kevin O'Connell said they are considering a quarterback change. Keep in mind that Nick Mullins now back from IR.
Nick Mullins, the only other one to have the ulnar collateral ligament
right.
repair.
And Brock
besides
Purdy, right?
Brock Purdy, yeah.
So I think there's a real chance that Nick Mullins is the starting quarterback in Week 14. A real chance.
And I think, look, Nick Mullins was their backup. Yeah. And had he not been on injured reserve when Kirk Cousins went down, he would have been the next guy up. Yeah. So I do think, they obviously know him. They know what he's capable of, and he's been with Minnesota for, he didn't just arrive there this year. He's been there for a couple of seasons. Yeah. They like him. He's very comfortable in that offense, and I think he deserves an opportunity to show them what he's got.
And anytime we name Nick Mullins, we have to mention the most important stat.
That he played for the 49ers.
That's more of a fact than a stat, but I'll give it to you. The second most important stat about Nick Mullins. Nick Mullins has the 2nd most passing yards through a player's first 16 starts in NFL history.
I believe that.
Who do you think he trails?
Brock Purdy? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, but not a bad guess. Has Brock started 16 games yet? It's got to be coming up here.
Yeah, believe it or not, probably not.
Patrick Mahomes. So how about that? Like Nick Mullins, no matter what happens for the rest of his career, like there's going to be a point. He's got grandkids, whatever. And he's like, Grandpapa was pretty good back in the day.
Well,
Only
he was,
Patrick
and
Mahomes.
he did play for a team that got him all the yards after the catch. So, of course,
It was
his
the
yard
49ers,
stats were
of
like
course.
through the roof. But
Although-
he was, remember, Nick Mullins was riding, if anyone can relate to what Josh Dobbs is going through, Nick Mullins' journeyman stunt came a little bit after the 49ers, but he was someone who was thrust into the spotlight and became the saving grace for the 49ers when Jimmy Garoppolo was hurt. He can
One of the
probably
times that Jimmy
relate.
G was hurt. Yeah.
I mean, how many quarterbacks have gotten their opportunity as a result? Who is to say? But I think it'll be interesting. I think Nick Mullins has shown us that he's very capable. I felt badly for Josh Dobbs. A couple of those picks where maybe they could have been caught, but he certainly had a lot of heat on them for what they were. Like, they weren't necessarily off target as much as they were like 100 miles an hour, where they should have been 35 miles an hour.
I believe it was 3 tipped passes amongst those 4 interceptions. Let's just wrap up the Vikings here with a couple of obvious thoughts and then one more interesting backfield thought. So TJ Hawkinson, another great night. What do you know? TJ Hawkinson, you rule. 5 catches, 50 yards, and the only touchdown of the game goes to Hawkinson. So kind of a quiet start for Hawkinson. Actually, a very quiet start for Hawkinson, but by the end, no issue with 16 fantasy points at your tight end spot. Jordan Addison, Stephania, he's got 10 targets last night.
And one catch that, had it not been out of bounds, would have been a beauty.
Well, I mean, that's a reason why Josh Dobbs might be.
That was on Josh Dobbs, yes. That one was.
Kyler Gordon, the Bears' cornerback, sort of slot. He kind of contacts Addison and actually gets hurt on the play.
Yeah.
It was nothing serious. He ended up returning a couple plays later. Wide open is Jordan Addison. He catches that pass. We're talking about him differently.
And he spun around to catch it. He just had nowhere. The ball was leading him out of bounds. That was not anything he could really do.
That's a Josh Dobbs play he needs to have back. But what will be really fascinating, and I'm going to save a little bit of this for when we ask you about Justin Jefferson, is what it looks like with Jefferson on the field. But last thought on this game is that there was a time earlier this season where Alexander Madison he represented like the minimal upside, but minimal downside play as well. He started off the season with like a bunch of games in the top 25 for running backs. Now it's a very, very much looking like a committee. As a matter of fact, despite being announced as the starter, Ty Chandler had the first snap of the game last night. So make of that what you will, but when you have two players splitting carries in a backfield that has produced, I think, one rushing touchdown by the running backs this season. I mean, they were the last team to not score a rushing touchdown by a running back, or to score a rushing touchdown by a running back. That means no fantasy value is what it means. Alexander Mattison needs to be the lead back by a lot to have fantasy value. He is no longer by a lot. He is no longer anywhere close to a lineup block, of course, to go into a bye this upcoming week.
Yeah, and I thought it'd be easier if he looked terrible all the time, but he doesn't. You know, and he looked fine. But there's not a clear distinction between the two, and I agree with you. They're just, when you have two that are equal, you have zero.
Yeah, the problem, I think right now, the problem for the Vikings is without Justin Jefferson, they've got a lot of fine. They've got Josh Dobbs, who has up until this point been fine, and there's been, better than fine, probably. But the running game's just sort of fine, right? KJ Osborne just sort of fine, and they're really missing Kirk Cousins and of course Justin Jefferson. Those guys are very, very good players. In the case of Jefferson, he is elite. So the Bears, they get the Lions after their bye. The Vikings also go into a bye. They play the Raiders in week 14. Let's move forward here to some injury updates from week 12 that will matter in week 13. Let's start with a few that actually took place this past weekend, Stephania, before some other injuries. Chris Olave for the Saints, what's going on there?
Yeah, Chris Olave and Raheed Shaheed, might as well talk about them together. It's both happened this week. Chris Olave with a concussion, injured in the third quarter, didn't return. Prior to his exit, he looked like the guy. 7 catches for 114. Remember, Michael Thomas is out and on injured reserve, so there was kind of a question of what's going to happen with Chris Olave. And to me, I also wanted to see what Raheed Shaheed would do. So this week, they face the Lions. We will see if Chris Olave is back or not. Raheed Shaheed has a quad injury. He was just 2 for 9 when he exited the game. If you were watching the game, you saw him throw his helmet, heave it on the ground in frustration. It sounds like he's unlikely to play this week. That, according to Nick Underholt at New Orleans Football. Dennis Allen said he had a pretty good quad injury there. But yet they're calling him day-to-day. So don't quite know what to make of it. These soft tissue injuries can always be problematic for wide receivers. So I just think, you don't count on anything. But I would make other plans. I think they could very well be without both Olave and Shaheed.
New Orleans Football, by the way, that's a great website. Go check it out if you haven't
Our former
already.
colleague Mike Triplett.
Yes, indeed. Tripp is the best. You want to play a little game of trivia here?
Oh, I'm probably going to. I stink at trivia.
Do you want to guess a Saints receiver who's healthy right now?
Perry.
A.T. Perry.
A.T. Perry.
Yeah. That's one. Lynn Bowden Jr., who had 2 carries for 40. He's kind of a hybrid. He was, of course, a quarterback back in.
Does Taysom Hill count as I'll do anything,
maybe?
flex?
Sort of.
Taysom Hill, Juwan Johnson.
But
he's not a receiver, but he's going to catch patches.
As a matter of fact,
catch passes.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned tight ends, though, there, because at one point, Dennis Allen kind of referenced the possibility of Jimmy Graham being part of the cures to their wide receiver roles. Jimmy Graham has been a healthy scratch for a long time here now.
He's been there,
desperate times, though, is what I'm saying in New Orleans. So might be, we'll see, obviously,
Alvin
on Olave.
Kamara. He's a pass catcher.
Alvin Kamara might project for about 30 catches on Sunday against the Lions. Pop Douglas, perhaps the Patriots' only pass catcher that matters in fantasy. Stephania, what's going on there?
Guess what? Now he has a concussion. This is his second concussion of the season. He missed a game in week 6 due to a concussion. Since he came back in week 7, he's been targeted 4 to 6 times every single week. We've been talking about him every week as somebody you could and should be adding potentially if you needed a deep flex. But he's, likely to miss if we go by patterns, but we do not know for sure. I would say second concussion within the season, definitely a concern.
A little bit nervous,
but consider this. There are other receivers, Juju Smith-Schuster, Devontae Parker. They each have missed 2 games with a concussion. Kendrick Bourne out for the season with a torn ACL. Slim pickings over there, and then an offense that just you can't write home about.
Yeah, I mean, and on paper, this should be the weekend to do it, right? Yeah, I would. Let's plant the flag. It's gonna be Bailey Zappi. Don't kid yourself, people. It'll be Bailey Zappi in week 13 against the Chargers, which on paper seems like a pretty decent matchup, right? It seems. However, they did play good defense on Sunday night against Baltimore. Very good defense, and then the Patriots they stink. I mean, that's as bad of an offense as there is right now in the NFL. So if you're looking for a next man up at the wide receiver spot, I mean, that's long shot territory on fantasy football now, that is it. A couple more injuries to note, Stephania, here, and let's begin with one that pertains to Thursday night football in Seattle.
Yes, Kenneth Walker. So everybody missed him this week with an oblique strain. I think if you were hoping you were going to get big things from Zach Charbonnet, sort of not the result you were looking for, but Kenneth Walker had the oblique injury that kept him out. Now they play on Thursday night, so this is really something to watch. He was listed as a non-participant on Monday, but yet Pete Carroll said there is a chance that he will play. They plan to not really practice him much this week. So this is going to be one of those you're not going to know until game time. And then the question becomes, how comfortable do you feel? I think they felt like the injury was not as bad as it could have been. But, man, Kenneth Walker, when he's on the field,
he's
hard
special.
to ignore.
Can we just talk about the fact that Pete Carroll's actually an NBA coach? I mean, he really is, right? The way that they load manage players during the week is incredible. It's one of one.
Yeah.
Like the way that Kenneth Walker III gets treated in terms of practice time would make you think he's like 36, right? Like I see guys who get like the rest days, right? Like guys who are actually 36. So it's like, hey, Trent Williams taking a rest day for the 49ers. The guy's been around since the 2010 NFL draft. Kind of makes sense, right?
And he's a big man. Who needs
big man, right? Yeah, right. Meanwhile,
need to run
Ken
around
Walker
right.
III is like 22.
Yeah, but here's the other way you could look at it is that Pete Carroll has survived running back misery from multiple injuries and not getting through a season.
Oh, I'm not blaming him. I'm just shouting him out.
You know what? Like, if you show up on Sunday and you can run, that's all I care about.
That's all that matters. Yeah, Pete, very player friendly. So when the NBA brings back the Seattle Supersonics, which bring back the Sonics. Everyone knows that should happen yesterday. But with the NBA expanding, likely in the near future, to 2 extra markets, we all love that to be Seattle. I nominate Pete Carroll to be the coach because he's already got the management thing down. Right? Like back-to-backs, not going to play.
Although,
3 games
load
in 4
management,
nights.
not a thing anymore in the NBA. They're not allowed to load.
They still find a way. They still find a way there, right?
We could get that is a whole separate conversation because I do think that's actually warranted. There's literature to support it, so that's a different conversation. But in the NFL, I am 1,000% for it because there's only 17 games that you play. It is brutal every single week. These guys absolutely should load manage, but they should train harder in the offseason. That's my platform, and that's what I'm saying.
Hold on now, Stephania. Don't get the player started, right? I mean, it's like...
listen, I know a couple players, ex-players who agree with me on this.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, it's
because
amazing.
if you can't come to camp and get in shape during camp anymore. Because camp is managed.
Don't get me started. This is a whole thing that you could get me on. And I'm not a player. I empathize. You said you're an empath earlier. Like I respect that these guys have certain limitations that they believe are important for them. But it is amazing how much things have changed over the past 30 years. They used to play 6 preseason games a year in the NFL. They used to have 3 days in the NFL during training camp. Like we are in a totally different world.
You could look at this as a contributing factor for the injuries across the season.
I have no doubt. I am no medical expert, but I have no doubt about that. All right, so a couple more here, Stephania, that were recently. Do you want to start with T. Higgins or which one next year?
Yeah. T. Higgins is fine. Just a reminder that he has had this hamstring injury since practice on November 8th, and he's been out since, and we haven't really known what to do with him because he has not practiced at all. Possibility, according to Zach Taylor, was kind of answering it like, I think so, that he could be back. Not that it's hard to know how to trust someone, a wide receiver coming off a hamstring injury. We've talked before about the average being somewhere between 4 to 5 games missed for a hamstring injury. But if he's back, there's certainly a possibility that he is a receiver who's back. And it all matters this week because there are 6 teams on bye.
Yeah.
You have to consider everybody who's back, who's definitely going to be, somebody who could potentially catch a pass when it's getting that critical for fantasy.
We'll track this on Thursday because they play Monday night. So there are 2 complicating factors here with T. Higgins.
Right.
3 really is 2. 1, he plays on Monday night.
First practice report, not till Thursday.
Yep. So you're not going to know for sure whether he's going to give it a go until potentially Monday during the day, right? Second of all is that He's been up and down. I guess the third factor is that he's got Jake Browning now.
Browning.
Right? So
I know.
a very complicated decision with T. Higgins. If you're super desperate and you got crunched by the buys this week, I get it, holding out some hope. If you've been able to manage without T. Higgins, though, I think I would ride with whatever plan that you have been on.
They
for
play
the past
at the
month or
Jaguars
so.
for what that's worth.
Tough. All right, so one more here. Stay in the state of Ohio, but I guess temporarily in California as the Browns spending the week at UCLA. What's going on with Amari Cooper?
Yeah, they're a banged up bunch, the Browns are, but Amari Cooper was one of those who had a rib injury and missed the rest of the game after he got hurt. Kevin Stefanski said that the x-rays came back negative. This was after the game. Here's what I'll say to you about that. X-rays are often negative with rib injuries. What it tells you is there's not a significantly displaced fracture, something very obvious that they see, but there are a number of times where players have an x-ray that's negative, but something shows up a little bit later on a more definitive imaging. They often will go by pain tolerance with these. Really a question of how he progresses through the week, but stay tuned.
Never
Amari
thought
Cooper.
I'd be saying this in week 13 of the NFL regular season, but the only way that I would start Amari Cooper this week, even with 6 teams on a bye, is if Joe Flacco starts for the Browns.
Can you imagine?
Which certainly
This
sounds
could
like it's
happen.
possible, right? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously DTR being in the concussion protocol opens the door for Flacco, and I get it. He's been there for 10 minutes. I still trust him more than what I've seen from DTR and Phillip Walker this season.
They sounded very positive about him.
I think
He's a veteran presence. He's going
here's
to
the
get
deal.
them through a game.
They didn't sign Joe Flacco to not eventually start him, right? Like, you don't sign him to just have him sit there and hold a clipboard for the rest of the season. They knew. I mean, unless DTR took off and became a star.
Even if DTR is healthy, again, remember, when guys are in a concussion protocol, and you're talking about the position that requires the most processing of any position. So it's in a foreign environment because they went out to California. They're not home. They're not in their usual routine. He took a big hit. You saw him leaving. His lip was bloody.
It was smashed.
Right.
Yeah.
So now add to that he's this young, new quarterback, difficult, trying to prepare at a time where you're in recovery from a concussion. They may not say it yet, but I really don't think it's him. I really think it's going to be Joe Flacco.
I'm with you on that. Let's talk about 3 players, Stephania, that have been out or missed some period of time recently. And I think it's finally, a fairly straightforward decision for Justin Jefferson.
Finally. But listen, this was, I also think that there was no formula here. I don't think it was team being sneaky. I think they have been actually incredibly transparent on this. And Justin Jefferson was really about how he felt as he progressed back from this hamstring injury that has cost him so much time. They feel good about where he is. They get the bye week this week, week 14. I anticipate you will see Justin Jefferson.
Great news right there. I'm here to tell you, by the way, I'm going to start him. Aaron Jones, Stephania, missed last week for the Packers, and they have begun their practice because they had the bonus practice this week. They play the Chiefs on Sunday night. Any chance we see Aaron Jones?
There's a chance. So this is a tough one because of the history here. So this is an MCL sprain for Aaron Jones. Remember, go back to the game where he was hurt a couple weeks ago. He left on a cart. He was, just devastated. He thought he had torn his ACL. He said afterward he thought he couldn't catch a break after missing all the time with the hamstring injury. This was the same knee. So same-sided injury, ends up with an MCL sprain. Now, he's had MCL sprains in the past, 2, in fact, and he's come back after missing just 1 game. Yeah. So everybody's looking at that like this is he's a guy who recovers fairly quickly from these. It was the opposite side injured before. But now you're talking about 2 consecutive injuries on that same leg. I think they're a little more cautious with him. Not so sure about this week.
We'll track that
one day at a time.
Wednesday is the first injury report because although they practiced on Monday, it was the bonus practice, no injury report required right there. If Aaron Jones is out, we know this. You don't play a Packers running back. A.J. Dillon's had so many spots, and he has continued to underwhelm in what should be a very fantasy-relevant role.
And by the way, Chiefs at the Packers.
Ooh, man, that's a fun game, huh? Packers, though, all of a sudden have some serious life.
Yeah.
Playoff life. The Packers and Rams, all of a sudden very much in the NFC playoff picture. They are rooting hard for the Cowboys on Thursday night against the Seahawks. Seattle 6-5 right now.
I think Cowboys have the edge there.
Yes, I would agree. Dak Prescott's pretty decent. Devon Achane, Stephania. Missed last week, last Black Friday for the Dolphins, and Jeff Wilson played a whole lot more as a result of it. Do we think he's back this Sunday against the Commanders?
I do. As of right now, I think he's back. I think this was more of a scare than a true injury. Remember, he had been on injured reserve because of the sprained MCL, and he comes back and very quickly goes out again. And Everyone's nervous, understandably so. But I think he got in a pile, knee gets tweaked, had pain immediately. By the end of the game, he was lobbying to come back in. And this is where Mike McDaniel was like, no. Like, we're just, you've been out for a while. Sure. Let's make sure that you're good. And this is actually very normal that a player comes back and there's some kind of apprehension from just getting tackled. That's why we say you want to see a player go down and come back up and make sure they're not hurt. Yep. So I think that all happened, and I think he's in good shape for this week. We'll see what the practice reports say. Yeah, we'll see indeed here, Stephania. I think, that he's such just an unbelievably game-changing fast player. You just hope that, I'm not talking fantasy right now. You just hope that, he's a pint-sized guy, right? He's tiny, You hope that these injuries don't become a thing that defines his career. This is the third one in, 12 weeks of NFL action for Devon Achane. We're going to dive into some waiver wire thoughts in just a moment, Stephania. That includes what you should do, how you should approach the waiver wire at this juncture of the season. But first, a word from our friends over at Geico. You overwhelmed by insurance? Make it easy. Always. Get all your insurance, same, in one place with Geico. Plus, get 24/7 claim support and on-the-go policy access to the award-winning Geico mobile app. See how easy insurance can be and go to geico.com. Smell that? Sure do. That is the scent of fresh turf and freshly cracked Dr. Pepper, which can only mean one thing. It's college football season. So block off your Saturdays and swipe a sweet Dr. Pepper from the mini fridge, because there's a new season of high kicks, long throws, and Fansville commercial breaks to carry you all the way to the West Coast games. That's right. The fans are back, and this year things are heating up. We're talking more hot takes, more heartbreak, more layers of face paint. Get ready to drink in all the drama this season with the help of the most delicious college football tradition there is, Dr. Pepper, the one fans deserve. I know. What's up with that? All right, we are back here on Fantasy Focus, and we're talking waiver wire ads, Stephania. Before we get into some of the names, I wanted to just lay out some thoughts on strategy. We have... I could use a tip or two. No, you don't. We are just 2 more weeks worth of buys away, but 75% of the NFL has already had its buy. You are at the point of the season where you have to make some decisions about what you need for the rest of the year. In prior years, I feel like one of the easy strategies for me to say to people was, hey, if I've got 2 quarterbacks, go ahead and, assuming your normal starter's already had his bye, just drop your backup, because unless your starter gets hurt, you're not going to play that guy. Well, I'm here to tell you now that everybody gets hurt at quarterback these days, right? And because of that, all the good ones too. Yeah, I mean, starters. Yes, I have been looking around, and there are a couple of leagues where I have been looking to either pad my depth, or I am a Josh Allen manager, and he of course is on a bye this week. And I'm saying to myself, the pickings are so slim right now, Stephania. Or there are leagues in which I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, I have a quarterback that I trust, but I don't want the other people who don't have a quarterback that they trust to get somebody great. So I'm going to try to beat them on the waiver wire. More often than not, my mindset would be just drop your backup quarterback. You're good to go. This year, I actually think there's some value in keeping that backup at a spot that you only start one player at, just to prevent your opponent from having that player, or because things have just been so injury heavy this year. Imagine if you got to the fantasy playoffs. Let's say you did that. You dropped your backup. Now you're at the fantasy playoffs. Your quarterback gets hurt. Yeah. You are in trouble, because if the trade deadline's passed in your league, you may not be able to trade for one. Yeah. You may not be able to find anyone, because the other people in your league have done exactly what you said, and they've picked up that backup quarterback to prevent you from doing that in the future. Like, your season could be over. Yeah. I highly recommend that you have 2 solid quarterbacks on your roster. As somebody who doesn't in one league, I mean, I am sweating it out for sure. And look, I've had leagues. I think this year in all the leagues I play in, I've lost Joe Burrow in one league. Yep. Who else have I lost? I'm trying to think of who else has gone. Achane was obviously Anthony out for a while. Richardson, yeah, geez. Oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, Anthony. It's been rough, and so I think we're at 52 2 is the last number I counted for starting
I mean,
quarterbacks.
God, what a monstrous number it has been. All right, so let's get to the waiver wire and some names and notes to find. We'll just go by position here, and I'll incorporate what sounds like a report that's been bubbling up right now, sort of see if we can get a little more info there before we dive into it. But let's start with quarterback. And Stephania, I will maybe what I'll do is I'll just serve up a name and just sort of get like your general. I say this name and you say what? Jordan Love. Any strong thoughts on Jordan Love? As a player,
recency bias would make me want. If I was looking for that second quarterback, I'd pick him up.
Yeah.
I was not a fan early in this season because he was struggling, and he's not some. I would have passed. I would have moved on to somebody else. But right now, and looking at the rest of the season that lies ahead for them, and that they have something to play for, and that he's starting to develop more of a rapport with his wide receivers. I would consider him.
Yeah, so
I was in need.
I like him more as a second quarterback than I do for Week 13 as a streaming option, and here's why: they play the Chiefs Sunday Night Football, which it's not. I guess the time of the game doesn't really matter, but I look forward to this game myself in a standalone window. It's all about the Chiefs defense, baby.
I was just going to say, because you could make the point that they're going to have to be throwing a lot because they might be playing catch-up football.
They could,
but the Chiefs defense has been really good lately.
Yeah, it's actually mostly that. And so Jordan Love, so let's just use a couple of recent quarterbacks that the Chiefs have faced that are outstanding. Tua, who's outstanding but is not going to run at all. Jalen Hurts, who is outstanding but is going to run a ton, right? Each of those guys under 200 passing yards against Kansas City. I believe they combined for 2 passing touchdowns as well. So defensively, the Chiefs are just such an iron. Like they're like the brick wall.
Who
in
knew
the back
that it
end.
was going to be their defense keeping them alive this year?
And maybe the offense found its mojo this past week, and that'll turn the tides as well. But defensively, they're so good. And so Jordan Love is a better runner. He actually does run. It just feels like it's a harder game to size up a bunch of upside here for Jordan Love playing on Sunday Night Football against the Chiefs. So I like him more as a stash than I do as a stardom in Week 13. But I just think there's some defense involved here. One of his teammates, though, Stephania, has really caught my eye. That's Jaden Reed, and he's available in about 70% of leagues. And Mike and I discussed both he and Jordan Love yesterday, and I'll just remake the case here on Jaden Reed.
3 straight games with a touchdown.
Yeah, 3 straight games with a touchdown. That part's awesome. And I just talked yesterday about how Matt LaFleur has really kind of discovered what he wants to do with this offense and who he needs to rely on to get the points out of this offense that they need to stay competitive in games. And Jaden Reed is a spark plug. Like, this guy is like microwavable offense right now. You know that because of the fact that obviously he's getting some targets, but they're using him as a runner. Part of that might be because of the fact that Aaron Jones was out last week, but they're creating rushing attempts for him. I drew the parallel to Curtis Samuel. He's one of those guys that every time he has the football, good things can happen, whether it's as a runner or as a receiver. So I think he's a perfectly reasonable add and stash. Same caveats apply, though, in terms of Jordan Love and Jaden Reed. Is like, it is a tough matchup against the Chiefs on Sunday night.
I think they've sort of been forced to find him as well because of the injuries to Christian Watson and even Romeo Doubs at times. And when the start of the season, I mean, ask Mike Clay what we thought about Christian Watson coming into the season. And then there was this void. And I think Jaden Reed flashed intermittently, but the consistency hasn't been there until recently.
This one's easy for me, Stephania. It's Josh Downs. And I get it. He got hurt, didn't even miss a game. But he got hurt, and he was very limited in that game prior to the bye. And they go into the bye, so maybe it's just because they had like that basically 2-week stretch where he was very iffy or unusable. How many targets do you think Josh Downs had this past week?
I have no idea. Did not look that up. 13?
13 targets for Josh Downs. Now, he only caught 5 of them, but that's less. It's not like he did not drop the ball, right? Like some of it was just sort of inaccuracy. But still, the point holds. Like, they throw the ball a ton. They play so fast on offense in Indianapolis. They just play so dang fast. Beyond that, like, every wide receiver target, it feels like 70% of the wide receiver targets go to Josh Downs and Michael Pittman Jr. So they played the Titans on Sunday, a matchup that we think, if they can block them up front, they'll be able to throw the football quite a bit. And I wanted to mention this, and it's a report that has just surfaced from the NFL Network recently, that Jonathan Taylor is now dealing with a thumb injury.
I was just about to say, like, Jonathan Taylor has been a non-factor in the passing game.
He was.
And now we're hearing this.
This is the report from the NFL Network. It says he's got a thumb injury that is leaving his status in doubt going forward. So we don't know exactly what that means, but my general rule of thumb. No, no pun intended, but my bad there. Is that like when the initial report suggests that the possibility of missing time is on the table, Stephania? It generally means the player is about to miss a whole bunch of time or some period of time, right? Like status in doubt. My general read is that
I think you at least have to consider it. Sometimes it means they're looking at options, like, and again, this is where it comes into play of like what's going to happen with him relative to the team going forward. Because you look at the fact that thumb injuries can be something that you try to play through for a while, or it can be something where you opt for surgery to either that's the end or it is going to help you get through the season a little bit faster. So sometimes there are multiple opinions going on, and that's why it's up in the air.
We did see a bit more of Zach Moss this past week. People were surprised. I
wonder if that's related.
Maybe that was part of it. And by the way, if there were a position in which not being able to use one of your thumbs fully probably matters, I guess quarterback would be number one if it's your throwing hand. Justin Fields a good example of that. Wide receiver or running back crowd be a close number two there. So Zach Moss available in 41% of leagues. This alone, this possibility of missed time certainly makes Zach Moss.
I'd go get him.
The most important waiver ad of the week here, given how he played earlier on in the year. Back on track, Greg Dortch, wide receiver, Stephania. Got any thoughts here on Greg Dortch? Actually, let me ask you this. Do you have any idea whether Michael Wilson might be available this upcoming weekend?
Well, that was the first thing I was trying to find out when I saw we were going to be talking about him. I think the fact that he didn't practice at all makes you nervous. I would say yes. You want to stash him now. He didn't play last week. The team has a bye in week 14, so it's just something to keep in mind. Yeah. Because we always talk about these guys who are injured, and if they're looking at if they're on the cusp. Do they want to wait? The Cardinals have one of those last bye weeks in week 14.
They do.
So potentially, if Mike Wilson with a shoulder injury, if you're looking at do you want to protect him, then maybe you do hold him out in week 13, and that makes Dortch that much more relevant.
He does, because over the past 2 weeks without Michael Wilson, he has moved to the slot and he has 17 targets.
Yeah, he
scored a touchdown this past week.
Rondale Moore.
Yep, he is. Rondale Moore is, and this is a hat tip to our guy Pulse, who noted that Rondale Moore is a slot receiver playing on the perimeter. It's not good.
Yeah.
We don't want that for Rondale Moore, but he is a team player, and Greg Dortch is incapable of playing on the perimeter. He's very, very small. He makes Rondale Moore look big. So he has been the beneficiary. So a deep league, like that's the kind of dart throw that I would be looking at if I needed a deep league consideration. Last one here. When I say Brandon Cooks, you say what? Besides like gets traded every 18 months.
I say a touchdown in 4 of his last 6 games.
That's right.
And I think there's a trust factor there with Dak that you're seeing come out with Brandon Cooks. I mean, and I think also there's so much attention on CeeDee Lamb, and rightfully so, because he's just such a threat, that Brandon Cooks sort of been ignored. And I think it was wide open on that touchdown he scored this week. Like there was nobody around. Nobody's paying attention.
Yes.
Maybe they will going forward, but I think the opportunity, Brandon Cook's such a smart player too. I really like him, and I actually picked him up and have been using him.
So
recently.
Touchdown in 4 of 6 games, as you mentioned. The mitigating factor is he's got 1 game during that stretch with more than 4 catches. Normally, I would tell you I don't chase. I don't chase touchdowns. I would normally tell you that I don't chase touchdowns. But have you watched Dak Prescott recently?
He's been creating a few touchdown opportunities.
He's unbelievable right now. I mean, the way that he's playing right now, the chance of him throwing 3 touchdowns in a game, Stephania, exists every single time he takes the field. You just do the math. Like if he's throwing 3 a game, even if 1 is guaranteed to go to CeeDee Lamb, who is the next most likely player to catch one of those touchdowns? Maybe it's a tight end. Maybe it's Brandon Cooks.
I think it's Brandon Cooks, because if you look at the other, it's not Michael Gallup.
Yeah.
Tolbert has had sort of some flash intermittently, but to me that goes back to that it's not a stat that you can measure, but there is a trust factor there with Brandon Cooks.
And the last thing that I'd say here is this: as we talked about, like knowing what you need on waivers, is like there are some scenarios in which you're saying to yourself, all right, I got to go 2-0 in the last 2 weeks of the regular season to make the playoffs. And 1 or both of my matchups includes me being an underdog. I can't afford to have like that player who's got like a reasonable floor, but a pretty low ceiling in my lineup. I need the Brandon Cooks in my lineup, right? I need the guy who might score 20 fantasy points. He might score 3, but if he gets you 5 for 65 and a touchdown, That's,
It's the old
almost
swing for the
20 fantasy
fences.
points.
That's
Yeah,
what
he
you
has
have
a
to
good
do.
swing
Yep.
for the fences ad. Let's move to some running backs here, Stephania. We already mentioned Zach Moss. Again, more on that as we get more information there. But Keaton Mitchell has looked good for the Ravens, and I thought the most important thing was that he actually led the team in running backs snaps for the first time.
That to me is it, because he had 9 carries, 2 catches. Meh.
Yeah.
It's the Ravens, but he's the one getting the most touches of them all.
So you and I both play in at least one 16-team league together, the War Room, but other leagues as well that I play in that are 16 teams. Like, you go to the waiver wire and you're just like, oh my God, like,
There's
what
nothing.
on earth is going on right now? And Keaton Mitchell is not even available in 16-team leagues for the most part. But if you're in a smaller league, you might be saying to yourself, what's the value if a guy has what you just said, 9 rushes and 2 opportunities in the passing game? It's actually not the value for what he is right now, Stephania. And I know this is pretty narrow because they don't play this week, so they're not going to get hurt during the bye week.
Right.
But if something happens to Gus Edwards, I guess theoretically, knock on wood, if Gus Edwards has an injury, Keaton Mitchell becomes very, very valuable. Mike described him aptly yesterday as like a potential league winner if something happens and you've got him in the playoffs.
Right.
That's why you're at. Again, know what you need right now during the regular season and add that player before you get to the playoffs. I think that also applies to Royce Freeman a little bit here. Here's the good news for Royce Freeman. He's running the ball better than he ever has. Like, he was really, really solid this past week. No one talked about it because Kyren Williams was unbelievable.
Ridiculous, which, by the way, if you had any question about Kyren Williams coming back,
no need to question that. He has been awesome. Yeah.
We talked about this on Fantasy Football Now. It's only those 2 guys.
That's it, yeah.
So when it's not Kyren Williams, it's definitely Royce Freeman. The disadvantage is that he's not going to catch you any passes. Like, 0
But
in the
when
passing
you say
game.
0, you mean like...
No, literally
has
0.
He has
none.
0 catches this year. He has
Not
1 target, 0 catches. So you need a touchdown. But I would imagine that if something happened in Kyren Williams, we don't want to wish that upon a guy who's already been through multiple injuries in the first year and a half of his career. We know that Royce Freeman's got a real good chance of leading the team in backfield carries. I also think that what would happen, Darrell Henderson, welcome back from the practice squad. So a useful insurance back, but that's about it right now. I'll wrap up here with actually maybe the most intriguing position right now. Uh-oh.
No. I was just you were going to talk at tight ends, and I know where you're going. And this one killed me this week because I wasn't. Well, I forgot that they might be changing their offense around this week, and I was like, he's coming back from the injury. I'm not sure how much I trust him. I'm not sure how much I trust him in this offense. Might have had him on the bench in my Scott Fish Bowl league.
Oh no! Did you advance?
I did advance. So did you. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. You as well.
Yeah. That being said,
fun league,
one of the most productive players, like, had an unbelievable game. And to me, this is Pat Freiermuth going forward.
If it's this going forward, I will I will
maybe
thank
not
the
that.
high heavens.
Maybe you won't get those rewards, but I think his level of involvement, this is what he should be doing.
Yeah, it was. You certainly hope it's closer to this than what it was prior to this last Sunday. So just a reminder that he had 9 catches. That's a career high for Pat Freiermuth. 11 targets, second most in his career, and 120 receiving yards. The most, not just in his career, but the most of any player in Week 12. No player had more receiving yards than Pat Freiermuth this past week.
I did not know
None,
that.
not one.
I mean, 120 is ridiculous for a tight end.
Yeah, it's
usually don't see that.
ridiculous, yeah.
Might be a TJ Hawkinson number
That's
or
it,
a Travis
yeah.
Kelce
That's a
number.
Kelce, yeah, exactly. So big time weekend for Pat Freiermuth, and the Steelers talked about this. Like, I am skeptical that they'll continue to put up 400 plus yards of offense, but if they are intent on making the tight end a bigger part of the offense, that means great things for Pat Freiermuth. And like, we know he's a second round pick a couple of years ago. Right. Like, we saw him; he was really serviceable a season ago. Like, the idea that Pat Freiermuth is breaking out should not be a total mystery given how talented he is and the track record of production. More of this, please. More of this collective Steelers offensive coordinator.
I don't know
More
what's
of this.
going on with their pass catchers. Otherwise.
Well, I think, they couldn't quite get it going. Although Deontay Johnson did have that touchdown that was, that was the survive the rule play. It was like this catch that, like, the NFL might use that replay when they distribute their virtual rule book every year as what it means to survive the ground or not survive the ground. Like, he catches a pass 2 feet down in the end zone, lands, he's tackled to the ground, and the ball jars free. Yeah. And that's exactly what the NFL has deemed is not a catch. Whether that's right or wrong, that's been the rule since the Calvin Johnson play several years ago. But still a quiet day for George Pickens. Still didn't see a lot of that. I think Isaiah Likely settled in. exactly where he should be, Stephania.
Yeah.
Number 80 had 8.0 fantasy points on Sunday night, and we kept saying, like, is he going to be the guy that last year without Mark Andrews went bananas, or is he going to be the guy that in the first 2 games this year that Mark Andrews was either out entirely week 1 or when he got hurt back a few weeks ago? And the answer was right in the middle.
In between. I was just going to say somewhere in between. But second in targets on the team, which is weird, but they're low reward targets, right? He's not like a Zay Flowers option where you know you're going to get a ton of yards and potentially the end zone. I mean, hopefully we do find him getting the end zone here and there, but I guess it was more encouraging that we really didn't know what to think going into this game. So the fact that he was targeted 6 times, I think, is helpful.
Yes, it was. No, I mean, it was good to see the 6 targets, and he's got the talent, right? 4 for 40, like as we were talking about with Damian Woody on Fantasy Football Now on Sunday, like just from a skill set perspective, if he has the ball in his hands, good things can happen with Isaiah Likely. Highly athletic player. Remember, he was the preseason star a year and a half ago, and you were like, do the Ravens do it again, steal another player in the draft? Isaiah Likely definitely has some value. They go into their bye, but he'll be back around, as Mike and I kind of agreed on yesterday, like maybe like mid to high end, tight end 2 upon his return in week 14. Last name I'll mention is just like if you're in a pinch this week, Luke Musgrave was on IR, which meant Tucker Kraft took over as a starting tight end for Green Bay. He found the end zone, but just 2 catches for 15 yards. I like the player. He's a good player. South Dakota, a great player at South Dakota State. Was in last year's draft class. Third round pick, I should say, this year. But I think you can find a more reliable option given the fact that the Packers distributed to a lot of players, and they generally don't lean on one guy.
I got one for you.
Okay.
What about Juwan Johnson?
7 targets this past week.
7 targets, and you're looking at Olave and Shaheed both being out this week potentially.
Totally. Yeah, no, 100%. And they're playing the Lions.
To me, it's like it's worth a dart throw. If you need somebody to fill in at tight end, at least he's probably going to catch some passes.
Yeah, that's a good name as well. Juwan Johnson, who had missed some time due to injury earlier on this year. He is now back and playing quite a bit more.
Taysom Hill still with more yardage than Juwan Johnson. But Juwan Johnson was somebody who at the start of the season, asked Daniel, is somebody that, thought maybe could be like somebody who would be more productive at the tight end, like a back end tight end.
Yeah.
And then he's been hurt. He had the calf injury, missed 4 games. It hasn't been great. Their offense has been out of sync for most of the season. Yeah. But I just thought after what we saw this week, might be somebody worth picking up.
Let's rip through a couple of names. We can wrap up the show here in just a little bit with some Week 12 winners and losers. Before we do that, I wanted to mention, by the way, that tomorrow is the trade deadline. Wednesday at noon is the standard trade deadline. As if you play with default settings on ESPN, tomorrow at noon is the trade deadline, which means anything happens after that, you're in trouble. Yep. You're not going to get through. So if you like to wheel and deal, you probably already know this. If you don't and you're like, oh my God, I don't have a running back to start this week. Yeah. A lot of trade offers over the next, let's call it 24 hours and 10 minutes from right now. And on top of that, Tristan Cockcroft wrote an article that's available on ESPN right now of potential trade players, as in like guys to trade for or guys to trade away, which includes some thoughts on Calvin Ridley and CJ Stroud. Dive in to read the entire article on ESPN.com or the ESPN Fantasy app now. Let's go to some Week 12 winners and losers, Stephania, and we'll go through a couple of winners here. And I wanted to start with Isaiah Pacheco, actually, and this was really important. So Pacheco, and with a huge day, 15 carries, 55 yards, 2 touchdowns, plus 5 catches on 5 targets for 34 yards. This is most receptions in a game since Week 6. And this I think is a Jerick McKinnon thing. Because Jerick McKinnon was unavailable for the Chiefs in Week 12. Way too early to tell in Week 13. Saying a groin injury, do you recall if he practiced at all last week, McKinnon?
I don't think he did, but I'd have to double check.
We have to go check, yeah. So that might, if he was practicing, that would give you a bit of hope that he would play this week. We don't know for sure on that. But if he's out and you have Isaiah Pacheco participating on like 60+% of the routes, massive value here. Massive value for him against this Green Bay Packers defense on Sunday night. Huge.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have anything to add to that, but we've talked about just how explosive and fun he is to watch, and clearly there's a trust in him. His utilization just went up. And
by the way, remember all the thoughts of like a committee in Kansas City prior to the season? They have nobody else to give the ball to. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is like, carbon dust right now.
I know, it's so bizarre. Still present.
Yeah.
And
Listen,
accounted for.
You can't hit them all. You can't hit them all.
No.
They're the 2-time Super Bowl champs in the past 4 years. CEH just one that got away. That's all. That's, you know what? Try every team. They've all made their mistakes. I promise you that. Doesn't always work out, but this team is so darn good they can overcome missing on a first round pick like that. Also, Deebo Samuel, Stephania, for your 49ers on Thursday night. This was a vintage throwback Deebo effort. Did you read anything into that, or is this just...
No.
Yeah, he's a 49er.
He's a 49er.
Yeah.
And if you want to be frustrated, then you are counting on somebody like Deebo Samuel or George Kittle, who it seems like they are kind of rotating in terms of who's going to have more of the boom elite game. I feel like Brandon Ayuk is sort of coasting at a comfortable amount that you're going to get from him pretty consistently. And Brock Purdy has got a really special relationship with Brandon Ayuk. So I think there's a consistent amount of volume you can sort of count on for Brandon Ayuk, give or take. But Deebo could have an amazing game and then be relatively silent, and same with George Kittle.
Yep, they are all 49ers. I am trying to hope that Deebo Samuel has this consistent workload every single week. But this, history recently shows us that for as great as he was, who knows what his role will be on Sunday in Philadelphia. Do you and Mike Clay have a bet yet?
No. Listen,
a wager?
I just want to say, first of all, 2 rushing touchdowns for Deebo, which reminds you of the whole, he is a wide receiver, but he had 2 rushing touchdowns. So the wide back thing is still a thing. Everybody who thought it was going to go away didn't go away. I have heard from so many Philly people. I got phone calls this morning. I was not answering my phone. I'm like, look at the Eagles fans getting a little frisky. Yeah, I think they want to start needling me about this matchup this weekend because, of course, no one could forget the fact what the Eagles did to my poor Brock Purdy in the NFC Championship game last year. And Mike Clay and I were watching that game together.
I remember that.
Mike stopped cheering immediately because I gave him the death stare after Brock Purdy got hurt by Hassan Reddick, who is playing out of his mind still, by the way. And I'm still a little nervous about that encounter. But it's going to be... it's going to be a great game.
49ers, 3-point favorites on the road.
I know. The Eagles fans are salty about that. I know.
Our director today, Brian, big Eagles fan, Mike Clay.
He told me he's not talking to me again after the show today until after the game.
Hey, all's fair in football and in rivalries.
Look, I'm not the one putting... Sure. I'm not gloating. I'm not putting anything out there. We lost the last matchup, and yet it's the Eagles fans who are... chirping at me about what's going to happen.
Man. All right. I was going to say, we'll save the loser. Let's be power of positivity today.
I hate ending on losers.
Yeah. So let's just do this. We'll bypass losers. Nothing that, they're all play. Like Saquon Barkley had a bad day. That's my takeaway is that he had a bad day.
He's coming back.
He had 30 fantasy points the week prior. He's still Saquon Barkley.
They have a bye this week.
They do.
So he's not bouncing back this week.
Yeah.
But I think
he might bounce back. He's Saquon. He might find a way to bounce back on a bye all the same. Well, here's where I want to wrap up instead, Stephania.
Okay.
Is that today is Giving Tuesday. It's a global day of giving. It's also the start of ESPN's V Week when we continue Jim Valvano's fight against cancer. You can make a difference today by supporting cancer research, which is needed now more than ever. If you're able, give now at v.org/donate. The best part, 100% of your donation goes to cancer research. So certainly a noble cause, Stephania. The 0601.
Absolutely.
It's been so dedicated over the years to the efforts for the V Foundation. So I feel like all I've done for the past, not even just the past 4 days, because now these sales start so long, I have just been unsubscribing and deleting emails asking me to buy something. Cyber Monday, Black Friday, now it's Cyber Tuesday, and Black Friday sales start a week before Black Friday actually begins. And then
everything's extended to,
So here, maybe you can turn the tides here today, people, rather than spending money on stuff that you probably don't even need, truthfully. Like I'm as guilty of anybody as buying some random pair of shoes that I could live without. Maybe you flip the script around and instead go to v.org/donate. Certainly means a lot to us here at ESPN. And sadly, almost anybody that you will meet has been impacted by this horrific disease. So we certainly hope that if you have it in you, that you would consider a donation to the V Foundation.
And I really think it's understated, but so important. 100% of your donation goes towards cancer research. So every dollar that you donate is actually going to research to fight cancer.
We'll do our best to help uplift those that are continuing to fight. And hopefully this power hour of fantasy football uplifted you for a little bit. We covered a lot of ground here, Stephania. And again, you're CJ Stroud. Just take it in stride. It's okay, Mike.
I think Tristan Cockcroft is talking about trading away CJ Stroud. Is that what you said?
You know what? He is. But it's not, because it's the idea that you can get a lot for him right now, which you certainly could with the way that young man is playing at the moment. She's Stephania Bell. I'm Field Yates. We are back tomorrow, Wednesday, Week 13, Rankings Chatter. Mike will be here. Hopefully Daniel back in the chair as well. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Giving Tuesday. We'll talk to you guys on Wednesday.
Are you nervous, Eagles fans?
Ooh, wow. Nervous? Fighting words right there from Stephania Bell. You guys are done talking to each other now, Brian. It's all good.